Hello and welcome to another episode of Sourcing Today. My name is Amit, and we are building a community for folks involved in global trade, supply chain, procurement, e commerce, and cross border payments. Today, we have a very special guest who has over 6 years of experience in supply chain and product development. He's currently working with GoNorth, which is an e commerce brand aggregator that acquires and scales consumer brand in multiple countries. So, welcome, Mohammed Faseeh Naveed, to our podcast. How are you doing today, Naveed?
Hi Amit, thank you for your great introduction here. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
It's an excellent afternoon over here. Let's start the episode by letting the viewers learn more about you, how you have joined this particular industry, supply chain, what was your journey like, where do you live, and so on.
Yeah, so I'm basically based out in Pakistan, but I've never really worked with a Pakistani company. It's more like when I graduated, it was probably the worst time to get graduated because it was peak COVID. So there was no other industry hiring other than e-commerce, right? Back at that time. So it's not like I wanted to do this. I ended up here by accident, and that's how it started. But some accidents are really fortunate, and this was one of them where I kind of discovered that this business came very naturally to me. So I kind of started off. My previous goals were to join sales overall, but I think I started off at my first proper job was Thrasio, and I'm still very grateful for the company to give me that opportunity. I worked there for 4 years. I can get into it like how what I used to do there, but like just a macro level overview. I used to do supply chain for 4 years there, different roles. And then later on, I kind of switched to from the American culture, which was Thrasio, to a more European slash Swedish culture. And now I'm with GoNorth since approximately 2 years. So it's been a wild ride overall. But yeah, my degree had nothing to do with supply chain. It was more
What
about
did you study?
so I did my BSc in management sciences, which was more like a data analytics role. I used to learn a lot of coding languages and fancy Excel sheets and everything, something that I've never used in my 6 year career, but it does assist you somehow or the other sometimes. Having that extra knowledge of data is always good, regardless of which industry you're from. But that's how I started, and I kind of did an unofficial minor in film studies. I used to watch a lot of films, and then I used to write critiques and other feedback papers on it. So that's how it all ended up. But yeah, it's been a quite diverse experience, I'd say.
Well, I think one thing is common between the Indian and Pakistan is that we both love movies, right? And there are a lot of cross-country musicians and the actors used to work, and we find it quite delightful. But yeah, that's an amazing touch point. Now, that's an amazing start of the career. And why don't you go a little deeper on your experience of 4 year when you were in Thrasio, what you did there, how you grew as a person, as an employee over there.
Yeah, yeah. So I started off as an associate there. I didn't really have any kind of a JD back then because they just wanted to build up a team because they were hyper growing, right? So I started off as an inventory planner, and I just used to, every new company that they were acquiring, I used to just look at their inventory and see if there's an order needed before we acquire it. Because sometimes what happens is when you buy a company, one day you buy it, 3 days later you realize it's missing uh, 60 days of stock for a specific item, which would result in a massive loss of sales, etc. So my job was just to make sure it's safe inventory wise. And then I used to put in any kind of recommendations for the people who were selling us that company, that if you were to sell this to us, you need to place these in these orders before you sell that to us. And that kind of led me to handle approximately 20-30 brands in inventory planning. By brands, I mean e-commerce companies, each of different categories, whatever that was. And then later on, it pretty much went to another phase, which was like I then got shifted to procurement and global logistics. So then I had less to do with inventory planning and data, and I used to do more supplier facing roles where I would buy inventory from suppliers, move inventory from one country to another through different freight forwarders, handle customs, handle shipping, handle freight, handle compliance, and then that kind of was the rest of my career with Thrasio. Unless my six after like my last 6 months were more like a hybrid role then because I knew both sides of the story in supply chain. So it was planning plus so I had a team under me. It was like 13, 14 people, and we used to buy like three different companies every week, and that was mad because
Wow.
you we used to I think we raised around $1.4 billion overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, and our net value of the company inflated because of the COVID factor as well. So you could guess an idea like $3.4 billion was something we used to hear about what the valuation was. So
Yes, that's true.
it was crazy. Yeah.
It was a crazy time. I think that was a time when Thrasio was also getting into trouble, and there was news around about the bankruptcy, and recently the news about for them to getting out of this, the new CEO coming on board. You
Yeah.
work with them. Can you
Yeah.
put down some story? What happened? How they are able to
Yeah. So
recover, and so
basically,
on.
what happened was they were projecting everything and they were overselling everything since the past 2 years. But then they thought it would happen forever, but nothing's forever, right? So they forecasted something, but then the COVID factor dropped. Everything that they bought that they think they will sell in 6 months ended up being 6 years of inventory. So they couldn't really sell that until 6 years because people used to they started going to their e-commerce shop, sorry, the retail shops and brick and mortar. So Walmart was open and everything. And then that led to them having millions of dollars of inventory that was not being sold, which put them in a cash flow crisis. Then they hired a management consultancy. And that consultancy also quite closely worked with me. Sorry, excuse me. Uh, and then we we managed to put it in a better situation, but it was still not better enough. The good part about me was that I had an opportunity to work with a management consultancy for a year. Then that gave me that extra level of exposure of how management consultants work when it comes to crisis management. So that kind of happened, and then I think the biggest crisis kind of hit when they over forecasted, and then the second was that their perception of when you become a unicorn, sometimes companies think they're just too big to fail now, but that's not really true. I think it's always you need to be on your A game, and even though the management that came in was pretty solid, I mean, the CEO Greg Greeley was with Jeff Bezos. He used to work with him under him and under his team, and he was the one who actually led the Amazon Australia program for Amazon. So he was solid. He's a solid guy. But even if no matter how solid of a guy you bring in or how solid of a woman you bring in, if your company has separate vision which is not really aligning with how things should work, it kind of doesn't really work in your favor all the time. So that's when we hit that crisis management issue.
I think the whole crisis happened with the wrong projection strategy, and that was because of COVID era. And I think this was across different industry. In fact, in the edutech industry, which is happening right now in India, past 5 6 years was brilliant, and we saw that the unicorn like Baiju, which was scaling at a top, were favorite for all the investors, and suddenly it's all crashing down because people started going out. They started taking the live classes or having an online education started taking a hit over there. And I think the similar thing is happening to an academy now. But I do understand what it happens. And now that brings to the next part of the whole podcast where your current job profile or your current role is coming up. You're working with GoNorth, which is a brilliant company, have more than, I think, 50 plus brands. How many brands are they managing today?
Officially 34 right now, 34, 35,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah. And
Okay,
it's,
wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. And what's your job role over there and how your day? pans out while working. And in fact, I would like to touch one more point. You're doing work from home fast before when the actual work from home was a fashion, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's actually a very personal question, and I think that's one of the good things and the bad things about doing.
Yeah.
So the good thing is you save a lot of money, right? You don't really travel, you save up on fuel, you know, it's just like you're good with the savings part. But I
Yeah.
think human interaction is very much needed, you know, in this industry. And I think sitting in a room since 4 years, moving hundreds of containers, speaking to hundreds of suppliers, it's been amazing. But I mean, there were times where we would go to the office in Thrasio, especially, but GoNorth's been fully remote. So I have adapted to it, but I do recommend people who can go to the office to go to that they do go to the office, because it's physical interaction is something else versus what you can do remotely, right? So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I won't be ungrateful. I mean, it's been great working remotely as well, especially when, you know, this whole industry has just evolved. That's one of the cost saving strategy of these companies, especially right these days. Don't buy an office space, just give them an expensive laptop, and you know, that's investment well needed. So I think I kind of understand that point as well.
I think we need a balance between the productivity and the efficiency as well.
Yeah,
And apart from the accountability which comes there, it's quite hard to run a company from the remote, but I think Gunath is doing amazing
they
job
are. They
in
are.
this.
They're like doing a lot of things that are better. By the way, I'm not, you know, whichever company I kind of work with, I'm kind of always an advocate for them. I try to give all the good insight. It's just constructive feedback that I gave about Thrasio, right? But for Go North, everything's been very positive. I know globally it's been a crisis, the inflation and everything. People haven't really been able to, you know, bring that much money into the companies, any company, but for that matter. Even Amazon is struggling. But despite that, the good part about GoNorth and any company similar to GoNorth, why I would say they're good is because they're adaptable to change. When you're a very big company and you have a lot of employees, you have an inertia that stops you from changing your policies and the way how you work. And people are resistant to change as well. But I think one of the reasons why GoNorth has been successful is, one, they have young people, right? So young people are very energetic. They can they can mold out the way you want them to mold out, and that's been a blessing overall with GoNorth. Uh, and I think the second is that they were not early movers like Trasi or Razor Grow for that matter. So they knew that they had to put this flexibility factor in their company if they were going in this business. So that's why I think it's been a great experience overall. Although my role at GoNorth is very different to what I used to do with Thrasio. It's been it's been more about product development and sourcing. I started off as a due diligence guy. I still help them acquire a few brands. For supply chain, I used to do their due diligence, financial analysis. Is it worth buying? Do we have the right compliance? Is it a growable brand? It's not like we don't want to buy and then crash it, right? So things like these. And then once we bought them, we stopped acquiring because we think that right now it's not the right time to acquire more brands. It's more about diversifying what you already have. So we now focus more on new products, new markets, and new channels, you know. And it's not just us, it's every company that's kind of doing this, but we're more aggressive with this because all other companies are doing aggregations on the side as well. We're not doing anything like that. We're more like, we just know we have a very clear vision. Our CEO just came in, a new CEO. His name is Ryan, amazing guy. He's been very, you know, approachable. And that's one of the good things about smaller companies as well. Your high level hierarchy becomes more approachable, you know. You can message them at any point in time, and they can give you immediate feedback. Whenever you have these levels of hierarchy, which we do have, by the way, but in our case, our hierarchy does not really mind, you know, that us approaching somebody that's way higher than us. They they're very open to it. Nobody's threatened, you know, in a way. So it's overall very really a good culture to be in, and that's why I kind of love the company here, especially with GoNorth.
Yeah, I think it's more of a startup culture, how you evolve it and how you curate it across the different branches and the category
Yeah,
level. Help us
yeah,
understand that what's your day is like when you start your day, what's your focus points are, and how you
yeah.
plan
So
out your whole day or probably the week.
my day has been a little tough off since the past 6 7 months because I have to deal with three different time zones. So I wake up not too late because I need to sync with the Chinese and all the factories there. I talk to them for that's how I start my day. And then I know China's going off at 2 p.m., 1 p.m. my time. So then I take a break. Then I go for subcontinental countries like Vietnam or India because we kind of share the same time zone, so it's okay for to message our Indian suppliers and our supplier base a little later. Internal communications are always going on, so our we have a fixed timing in internally where we have to be available for the office stuff. And then I think after 4 p.m., I take an hour off because then I know that the US is going to be up. So that's the night time. And then I have to work around 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Sometimes I work at until 3 a.m. So it's a, that's why I think remote culture has been a blessing. Like I get to sleep whenever I want, which is quite much, very much needed for a job like this because you have just so many suppliers around the world that you can't possibly be available for everybody at the same time. So, you know, that flexibility. And with that, of course, it's not like that daily, but there are days like these, but some days are very light. So some days it's just me working with the internal stuff and not speaking to anybody outside the company. So it's more of, everything's been very open in that way.
Yeah. Wonderful. So your primary experience has been working with the Chinese manufacturers and suppliers, and recently you have started procuring and sourcing from India and other Asian countries like Indonesia.
Yeah.
So why don't you put up some points about what you learned and how do you observe the Chinese suppliers, their way, worker culture, and so on.
The Chinese are really good at what they do. They have a very structured approach in terms of manufacturing units. They know what compliance is. They know where they can save money. Everything of that sort. It's pretty good. But there is a language barrier with the Chinese overall. I think they prefer Mandarin over any kind of language, but that does not really eliminate them from the production scope overall. It's they're really good people to work with. But with the recent policies that the US has introduced, especially this price war and everything, it's been very difficult for them to maintain business. So they have been since they've earned a lot of money in these past this decade, what they've done is that they have bought in factories in Thailand. Their manufacturing units, they are growing their business. I think they just signed a deal in Saudi Arabia now. I was reading on it yesterday. And they're building out their factory units now in Saudi Arabia as well to eliminate this high duty tariff for anything that's going out of China. But on the same side, I won't really eliminate the Indian supplier base, the Pakistani supplier base. They have a huge opportunity because not everybody will be open to waiting for these Chinese people to make their factories, manufacture them, shift everything out to those countries, and then start because everybody wants their own business to have a contingency plan in place. So there is a huge opportunity for Indian manufacturers, Indonesian, Vietnamese manufacturers to capitalize on this situation that the Chinese found themselves right now.
Talking about the China plus one strategy, which every other companies are now talking about, every sourcing directors or the purchasing people are
Yeah,
worried about. And I think the only factor you're looking at is the cost structure because of the import duties and other. Or is there any other factors also, which means that not depending on one single supplier or one simple single region to be specific?
it's
What's the
both.
approach?
It's both because yes, you want to have more than one suppliers for each product because you never know, right? It's not just about a geographical location. It's about any unforeseen circumstance. There have been, God forbid, there are explosions sometimes due to carelessness or something, or
Yes.
somebody just has a legal issue, so they need to shut out their factory, etc. So we need to make ourselves safe. So one of the reasons why we do all sourcing people right now, what they're doing is they're expanding their offerings throughout the globe. And then the second reason why they're kind of doing this is because, of course, the duty tariffs. That's very, very important as well. And the third, there are actually better costs available now outside China, because I can give you an example of a diaper bag that I was looking at, and it had a manufacturing cost within China at $12.3 a piece, and we ended up sourcing that. I mean, we did not end it up because we kind of killed the project, but we had a better opportunity in Vietnam, which was 40% less in cost. Uh, and on top of that, you save up 25% of duties on that product. So it's a lot of things. And so yeah, it's a bit of both. It's a price war issue, why we're kind of doing this, but then there's other things as well associated with it.
So when it comes to the large manufacturing units, especially in India, we have seen the growth being tremendous and, in fact, competing with the national or the international levels of the market as well. For example, in automobile, we have seen a good manufacturing happening. Even in the some of the segment, the toys where the Disney has started manufacturing, even in the electronics, Apple has started manufacturing in India. But when it comes to the consumer goods, we have this factories or this manufacturing is spread across the small and medium and even the cottage industries. So my question is that whoever is watching this podcast, the manufacturer, what they can learn out of this thing, what they should improve at getting at if they have to do business with company like yours or any other company which is selling in West.
I think there are a few things that are not considered important when manufacturers are kind of coming up with their products. Just because you have a good product does not mean that a company will like you, right? It has to be more than just that. So there are a lot of good products being sold in other places as well. I think it has to do with the cash flow that you guys have as manufacturers, because now countries companies have become more and more specific, focused around cash flow. Even if they're well off, they want to have better terms. They don't want to pay a deposit on an order. If they want to, they want to do it like a very small deposit. They want net terms as long as possible. And that's one of the reasons why China still has a lot of monopoly here, because they are able to afford that. So, my advice to anybody based out in Southeast Asia, apart from China, is that if you're coming into this business, make sure you have a backup cash flow ready. There are a lot of You're not unsafe by any means, because there are a lot of insurances available. You can include that insurance cost in your product, so it's not like you're going to suffer financially if something gets cancelled and you've produced something. So that's not an issue. But people need to be more sound about what insurances are, how cash flows work, what are compliance documentations, how we get them. Sometimes it takes time for suppliers to for sellers like us to apply for a compliance document. It takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks. If we find a supplier who already has this, why would we wait 4 or 5 weeks? And even if they're a little expensive, it will give us that the opportunity cost is that we forego 4 weeks of sales then. So it's okay to afford some extra cost but at the same time have our compliance very, very safe. So, and yes, Chinese people kind of support your compliance very much. They pay that out of their own pocket mostly. But there are suppliers in Southeast Asia that have, whenever we have to pay for compliance costs, which is basically a factory facing issue or area, they would request the seller to pay these things. These are very small things, but they kind of give you an idea of how big or how willing or how much a supplier could go for you in terms of supporting you. So those things I think can be very quickly learned and fixed overall in this region, and people can really make a good living out of it if they fix these things.
So one question I would like to, since you have been working on the part of the e-commerce, right? How do you see the future of e-commerce evolving in US, in European countries, or even in countries like Pakistan, India? How do you see
It's
the whole e-commerce business?
it's growing. It's definitely growing, but I would say that e-commerce is no longer just Amazon. That people need to know now. It's beyond Amazon. It's TikTok Shop. It's Walmart. It's Shopify. It's so much more. I think until the COVID peak season, it was all about Amazon, but now it's not. Especially with the way how Amazon has been very unjust with their fees and how they've consistently increased. And I'll give you a very devil's advocate point of view on this. There are people who are flag bearers of, you know, global warming, and that's very much something we're coming. That's a voice that we see from the West more because they are, of course, more literate than Southeast Asian people, and they have a better education system. But companies like Amazon, where now they are, instead of, if you ship out a container without paying the placement fees, your trucking for that container will split out in three different locations of the same truck of the same container. So they'll bring out your container, divide it into three different smaller trucks, and then ship it out. Or you could pay the fees and have it all delivered to one place. Now, people can't afford that. Not everybody can afford it. What is that eventually doing? That's just adding to your carbon footprint, right? You're trucking more trucks just because you want to exploit more from the sellers. And so it's kind of a very funny thing I kind of, observed where it's Amazon has these eco-friendly badges on their Seller Central, but at the same time they're not really doing the same thing to support. So yeah, people are trying to get out of Amazon as much as possible. There are other marketplaces like Shein, uh, Walmart, so many more. So I think
Yeah,
that's
recently Finnair is also doing quite well.
yes, yes, it is, it is, and that's why this is happening, and I think it was bound to happen in a way.
Wonderful. You have so much immense of knowledge, and probably it all has come from the experience. What would you like to advise to any youngster who like to get into a supply chain or a similar kind of job and work for companies or even start his own business out there? What's your advice for them?
Oh, tough one. I think don't do it. I mean, that's my first, like, don't come to supply chain if. But yeah, that was on a lighter note. I think I told you that on in the start of the interview, I was more into sales, right? Not every time when we plan something, it doesn't always turn out to be that way because you need to know what comes naturally to you. So my
Yes.
advice to everybody would be that it's good to have a vision, but sometimes you need to be flexible about a few things. It's I think supply chain is one of those jobs which would affect your work life balance the most because of the different time zones and everything. So be prepared for it if you're coming. Second, don't follow anybody's advice, including mine. I mean, everybody has their own circumstances. It's very easy to tell people to do supply chain, apply for this company and get into it while sitting in an air conditioned room, having a good perfume on. But I think people, especially in the Asia, half of our population, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we're like below poverty line, It's and people have different circumstances. So who are we to, dictate like you need to definitely do this? But yes, what I would say is do what's best for, you on a longer run. Don't go for immediate money, which would come in you could see like things like, I don't know, any example that some people could see Nokia booming and then they want to join Nokia, but now Nokia is dead. And nobody knows Nokia now anymore because of there's so many other options available in the smartphone market. So don't go for a Nokia. Go for something that you see potential in. And I can give you a personal example. Like uh, Thrasio is still doing business, even though they declared bankruptcy, but they're still doing business. But I think I chose a smaller company like GoNorth over Thrasio because they had a much more clear vision. And then I they kind of align to what I wanted to do. If I had to stick with a bigger name on my CV just to make it look sexy, I would have preferred Thrasio any day, right? But it's not always about that. It's also about what you feel internally, and if you're satisfied, then whatever helps you go to sleep at night. That's pretty much what I would say.
That something what value you are adding to the world or even to the
Yeah, 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 man. That's absolutely true. It all ends up like what your conscience would want, at the end. That's
community.
that's pretty much it.
So that was Mohammed Faseeh guest, his excellent advice and experience which he shared with us. Thank you very much, Faseeh, for your time.
Of
And
course.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast as well.
I did.
Thanks for watching the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe channel and visit www.sourcing.today to read the latest blogs and join our LinkedIn community.